As software and computers have been working together more and more over the last few years, there's been a tendency to develop software and systems that will read data and information from other types of files, including from like Macintosh to PC and so forth. But as you work with Excel, there are a lot of different types of files that you can save it as. And that's good to know because a lot of information is stored like a database or logged information. Obviously, we know them as calculated spreadsheets, all those kinds of things. So as you're going to save this, you're going to see that there are a lot of options. And probably the most common are the workbooks, of course, which is the typical Excel workbook. But you also have things that you can do to save it out to the web or in text files, those kinds of things. So I brought up this template for vehicle logs, and I want to save it as a different version. I may want to be giving it to somebody that doesn't have the latest version of Excel, or have to give it into a system that is going to have to read this data and then do some other calculations on it, whatever. So as I go to the File, Save As, I'm just going to say to the desktop here. And as I do this, I'm going to bring this up a little bit. You'll notice right here, File, Save As Type. I'm going to hit the down arrow, and you're going to see a lot of options here. And it doesn't have a scroll bar, so I'm going to bring this up a little bit more and drop this down. Okay, so the default is an Excel workbook. And that Excel workbook is actually built a lot for the web, meaning it's designed to be transferred safely over the web, meaning it's not going to allow macros and Trojans and all kinds of different things that could be added on to a workbook. So it's safer. It's intended to have more security for it. Okay. So as you go down the list here, you'll notice macro-enabled workbook, because they've tried to push away from that, because often people will put macros that will harm your systems and mess up your computers from macros that are running on the workbook. A lot of times when you get a workbook that has macros in it, it will ask you, do you want to turn all those off just for security reasons? So that's where all that's coming from. Binary workbook, earlier version. Sometimes who you're working with doesn't have the latest version, so there's a reason to have those available. And sometimes when you'll do that, it'll say these features are no longer available because you're saving it down to a different version. XML data, so you're working heavily over web data. It's the lightest data, by the way. Your file sizes will get smaller. Single file web page and web page, so you can share this out on the web and it will look at it as a web page. A template. Nice thing about templates is you can build basically the shell of the spreadsheet, the worksheet that you want, and then reuse that over and over. So like we've looked at employee records in some of our sessions, that could be saved as a template and then just brought up every time that we're ready to create a new one, so we don't have to rebuild it every time. We know it's created as a standard and has all the colors, all those different things that you can work with. A template, but now has an Excel macro enabled. Again, less security, but more functionality there. Template for earlier versions. Tab delimited. You'll see this when you're trying to dump data into databases or Unicode text. Spreadsheets for XML in 2003, all the way back to 95 and Microsoft Excel 5.0. Comma delimited and format text space delimited. Again, these are heavily towards data, especially going into other database type programs. You have text for Macintosh all the way back to DOS. CSV files for Macintosh and DOS. Now, the only thing to be aware of is that when you're getting into these areas like text files and so forth, often they will only save the first sheet. So if you have 4 worksheets in your workbook and you save it as one of these, you may find it is a lot lighter than what you originally saved it as. It's because some of these file types will only take the first or the active sheet in the file that you're saving. So you may have to put all the data on one worksheet or separate the worksheets into different workbooks, different files, so that it'll pick up everything you want. Symbolic link, an Excel add-in, 97-2000, PDF. So if you have the ability on your computer to turn files into PDF files, that's an option there. XPS, strict open, XML, and open document. So a lot of these, they take a long time to explain and demonstrate, but just know that these are there. And if you're needing to do any of these other things, make sure you really understand what you're going to get and how it's going to translate, because data may look just great on your spreadsheet here, your worksheet here, but once you start putting it over into other types of versions and even other types of programs, you're going to see some very different behaviors. So be aware of that. We just want to make sure that as you start to save these things as previous version or other file types, that you're very aware of what it will look like and what it does. So I'm going to save it as an earlier version, as a 97-2003 workbook on my desktop. I'm just going to hit save. And this is what's going to happen at times. Because it's an earlier version, it'll automatically do what's called an Excel compatibility checker. So it looks at what features are not supported in the earlier version. So there may be some formula issues. In fact, we got 2 of those. Object changes, functions, alternative text, and then minor loss of fidelity. I mean, you've got all kinds of things, and you can copy these things over to a new sheet so you have that available to you. You can look at that. You continue to work through it, formulas and so forth. So be aware that as you go back to earlier versions, a lot of the functionality was not there yet. So you may lose some of that functionality. It's a good thing to check it, especially if you're trying to hand this off to customers or people that you were trying to communicate with, and test those out to make sure that the functionality is there for you. So I'm just going to click no for that last option. And that's what you need to know when you're working with saving as previous or other versions.